Yes, hello, and a warm welcome to this fourth webinar in a series on climate adaptation. My name is Rudy, and I will be your host in this upcoming hour. And over the last webinars, we've reached or we covered already an overview of what's happening on the bigger topics in the world regarding climate adaptation. We spoke about water resilient infrastructure. We've met with someone in Canada. The last month we were in Australia, so to say, on bushfires and landslides. And today we will have the perspective also from the Sweden landscape. It's so good for you to be here at the moment, or maybe you rewatch it in the playback. For all the people that are attending live, here are some instructions on the webinar. As we are going to record this, obviously, and all of that will be viewable on platform WOW. That's obviously the host of this whole series. And on there, you see way more content on water and also road relevant, infrastructure relevant topics. But for this very webinar, you won't be visible at all. You won't be audible, but you are able to communicate with us. And that's by using the Q&A button below. So in a minute's time, I will introduce you to two experts, two speakers in this field. And during their talks and afterwards in the Q&A, you can send in your questions using that Q&A button below. You can also upvote some of the questions if you like it as well. And then I can see it. And as the moderator, I can ask them out loud for the speakers. Then if something goes wrong with the screen, with the sound, with your internet, please therefore use the chat. That's the other button. And then my colleague behind the screen is able to communicate with you to reset it or to get things going again. So that's actually for now for the webinar. Maybe you want to have pen and paper at hand because we will dive into this very expertise topic of riparian management led by the landscape. And it's actually the water banks of waterways. They used to be very functional and straightened out for transport and for our own human use. But now more and more, there is this understanding that we want to change it and to have a nature-led approach to this. With us are two speakers, and please swing on those cameras. Boy Possen, you work with Brabant Water, and as well Stefan Ploum by AEQUATO. Good day. Boy, how are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you.
Yeah. Are you all set for your upcoming presentation?
Yeah, should be.
That's excellent. And Stefan, you're actually joining us now all the way from Sweden, if I'm correct.
Yeah, that's correct. I'm right in the landscape that we're going to talk about.
How is the weather today?
It's a little chilly, a bit of frost and a nice sun, so it's a good start of the day.
Excellent. And I read in my research that you actually love to go out on a working day when it's raining, because that's like an optimal condition for you to do your research, isn't it?
Yeah, then the water starts flowing, and then you should be in the forest to check out all the streams. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we will hear more of you in a bit, but first and foremost, we have Boy Possen. You now work recently with Brabant Water, one of the bigger water suppliers in the south of the Netherlands, and you are an expert in the
Yes.
acclimation capacity of plants. You do a lot of research and you work with other parties as well. Are you ready to take it away, to share your slides and to present us your overview? There you go. And yet and again, for the people attending, please send in those questions to Boy and to Stefan as well through the Q&A button. Feel free to respond. Here we go.
So, riparian management led by the landscape. There's already landscape in the title, so I think it's good to have understand where we're coming from. So the picture on the right hand side is basically where we're coming from. On the left hand side, the picture, everything that's purple was basically people couldn't live there. So they've been working against the water to try and get it more dry, to make it more livable. And as you can see from the numbers in white on the picture, in the beginning they weren't very successful at it. Every now and again there were big floods with with catastrophic consequences, all the way up to 1953, basically. Although the frequency got a little bit lower. But water, it was a dangerous thing, and I think apart from tulips, wooden shoes, and windmills, the Dutch way of working with water is probably as famous. What we're going to do today is focus a little bit on the on these areas here. So the yellow areas amongst the purple. So this is where most of the people lived, and this is where the stream valleys developed during the course of landscape development, so to say. I also think it's important to know where we're coming from, because what we are, what is intended by riparian management led by the landscape is basically using nature. But what we understand and protect as nature values nowadays, it's the agricultural landscape of the older days. So it's good to have an understanding of where the landscape is coming from. On those higher grounds, amongst the purple peatlands, the landscape was used intensively already really early on. The first water mills are known since the year 900, so about the same age that people were trying to make the peatlands livable. In the higher parts, they were already using the water, and this is one of the earlier maps where you can see what I mean. So here is a stream and a stream valley, and all around the lower parts you can see small agricultural fields, mainly grasslands. And here's this is from North Brabant, where there are many streams actually, and you can see that all the stream valleys there are used already. And slowly we're starting to go up and get the water from the higher parts through the stream valleys. So we were already a long way. And what it looked like is you have to use the water. They were using the water to fertilize the grassland, to prevent the grasslands from freezing too much in winter, so that they could use them earlier in summer. So, so it was perfectly normal to have small streams which would flow over the grasslands, as you can see here, or the forests in the lower parts of the streams. They were flooded annually, quite high, as you can see here. This picture is actually fairly recent. It's from 1949. So it was still acceptable. And when we are talking about riparian management led by the landscape, this is basically, for most people, this is the reference. This is the reference picture they have in mind. Basically, after World War II, there were a lot of technological developments. We here, at least here in the Netherlands, as in many other countries, we had food shortages. So we decided to really use the stream valleys from the bottom to the top. And you can see here that the technical advance, basically from left to right, there's a almost 30-year difference between the pictures, but you can see here what the original stream valley used to be, and this is what we made, original stream, and this is what we made out of it. So we really started to add more water faster to the streams and the stream valleys, just so that we could increase production and have no more famine. So this what you can see here in the picture on the right is basically what we're trying to reverse by riparian, by managing the landscape in a nature led way. So Van Deurzen, they can draw much better than I can, so I've used their picture here. But basically, you can see the difference before the large scale developments and after. So I put here 1950, but I hope from the previous slides it's clear that this is by no means intended to be a fixed period. It's just a switch in technological development. But before that, the landscape was already used, and it was used heavily. It was used as heavily as possible for the technological means at the time. And we have been doing it since 800 and possibly even earlier. So it's just a matter of making a distinction. I'm not trying to say that the landscape on the left is natural. It by no means is. So, but what we have done at the same time is that we have robbed the landscape of its capacity to hold water. Everything we did was aimed at getting rid of as much water as fast as possible. So what we basically achieved is that from just a more natural rhythm, where once in a while there is a lot of water after heavy rainfall, after possibly even snow melts in the past, there was a peak. It was quite a long peak, but it was shallow. And what we've done is that we have made the peak narrow and high. So narrow and high peaks, they are difficult to deal with because the water already has a lot of force. It takes away a lot of sediments, and water which has gained force becomes dangerous. So if we would be able to use these principles here, not saying that we should copy the image again, because also there are all kinds of other stakeholders now which have a valid voice in the landscape, and for whom the landscape has a valid function. But if you can use elements from the older landscape to try and get this peak a little bit lower again, to prevent these, basically the arable land washing away downstream, which you can see here with these gullies all through just after one heavy shower. That would be nice, just for safety reasons. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to slow the flow. We're not trying to prevent peaks. We're just trying to make them more manageable. So we're going, the aim is basically to reduce peak flows. So then we get a reduction in sediment transport, as I just showed you in the previous picture. We decrease the flood risk, and we improve the water quality. We improve the water quality because we're not eroding the landscape as much, so we're not taking as much of the fertilized top layer towards the lower parts of the stream valley and the stream itself. And they have in Great Britain, they have already practical experience, and they have shown that if in a whole stream valley, if you take 30 small local measures, you already get a 35% reduction in the peak. So they have already shown in practice that it actually works. If you take small elements, so you don't have to do everything at once, but everyone can do a small bit on their property, for example, and then you actually increase the protection for society as a whole. The second thing it does is that it increases groundwater recharge or infiltration from rainwater. Because if you're trying to get rid of the water as fast as possible, there is no time for infiltration. And also, if you have only arable lands or even only grasslands and the higher parts of the stream valley, the runoff will be much quicker than if you have a more diversified land use. For example, some forests, some shrubbery, some flower or herb-rich grasslands, which have a diverse root structure, as you can see here in this picture. So you make it easier for the water to infiltrate, but also because the roughness of the stream valley increases, you also give it more time. water needs a little bit of time to infiltrate. And by having a more diversified stream valley, you of course have more niches available. So you have more, you can increase your biodiversity because there's more space for animals and plants to live in, and the space they have gets distributed across the landscape more evenly. And thirdly, finally, you get improved carbon fixation, mainly below ground. Because what you're doing by giving water more time to reach the stream, more time to infiltrate, is basically you make the landscape a little bit wetter. And as illustrated here, the dark parts is the below ground components. So for example, peat formation or things like that. And you can see here that the moist vegetation types, be it grasslands or be it forests, they have a much higher below ground carbon storage capacity. And from my point of view, the below ground carbon fixation capacity is most relevant because it's less likely to be, for example, harvested or to be prone to some production schedule, or this is the most durable way of storing, at least from my point of view. So by slowing the flow, you get a minimum of 3 benefits. It's a reduction in peak flow, increased groundwater recharge, and improved carbon fixation. How to slow the flow? As I said, we can't copy landscapes from the past one-on-one to today. Society has changed, land use has changed, balances have changed. So we have to think about what we can do. The main mantra, I would say, almost, would be to start high in the landscape, whether it is close to the source or high up on in the stream valley, and implement measures all over. Because your aim is to prevent water gaining force. You want the water in the landscape, you want to use it when it's dry, for example. You want to keep it there as long as possible, but you don't want it to become out of control. So there's 3 ways of doing that. Mainly, there's more ways, but these are the three biggest quick wins, I would say. So you can create temporary storage in the stream valley. Here are 2 examples from England. In the top one, where a farmer has just in a natural depression, he has added a very small dam. You can see by the size of the person, it's not more than a couple of decimeters, just to break the water for a little while, and it will flow over to the next one. And in the lower one, you will see they are trying to restore the previous marshland, which was here but has been drained. So marshland is much rougher. It's much more difficult for water to penetrate, to flow down through. So by just making these old ponds visible again in the landscape, which will, of course, this is just after they finished, so this looks a bit artificial, but it's actually very close to nature what they're doing there. They are preventing an extra stream from developing here. Roughening the stream valley flank. It's basically that you're trying to get some more diversity in not only in roots but also above ground. So this is an example from the Netherlands, from the southern parts of the country, where we actually do have very steep stream valleys, as you can see here. So there's the forest on top, and then there are these. Well, I can't translate the Dutch term for it, but let's call them hedgerows for now. So there are these hedgerows between the fields, which simply prevent the water from running down very fast. So it's just stopped here. Whereas the land in between, it's still used for grazing as it has been for most of history. And here this is an example from England again, where they are actually restoring hedgerows, which have been removed from the landscape for production reasons, but now they're trying to restore it again. And land use changes. Of course, I already discussed on those shortly, but this is what it would look in practice. So you just want parts of your landscape where you can store the water temporarily. Not as a big bathtub, but just something which can be very wet and where the water has to find its own way down to the stream, and in such a way that it takes time. So this is an example from a small marshland. This is actually very high up on the stream valley, as you can see well, actually you're looking across the stream valley. So this is still high up, and the very wet forest types, which we have occurring naturally in the Netherlands at a very low part, they of course do the same thing. So we're trying just to give water time. And as a drinking water company, we of course own quite a bit of land, and we too are trying to do our bit there. So this is an area, the Klotput in Eindhoven, which is well, quite central in the southern part of the Netherlands anyway. But here you can see how the land use has changed. So here it was just a marshland with just a few roads running down towards the stream. And now you can see two highways. You can see here already the city. If you look very closely, you can see the stream. It's still there. It's still there. Here's now a high-tech campus from university. The forests have been converted into sporting fields, and this was all arable land, which had been drained, as you can see clearly here. So the ditches used to drain it, they we're here in the in the lowest part of the stream valley, by the way, which is an important thing to note, because already all the water is coming here because it wants to go to the stream. So to make the land usable in the old-fashioned way, so to say, there were a lot of ditches. They were draining the groundwater, and anytime it rained, they were draining the surface runoff as well. So all the water transported towards the mainstream as quickly as possible. Of course, as a drinking water company, we don't own the mainstream, the Dommel. It's for the water board, so that we couldn't influence, but we were able on our own property to basically remove the ditches, to get the groundwater back to the surface, and to make sure that any rainwater that falls doesn't flow towards the Dommel immediately. So in doing so, we have well, actually in quite a considerable area, but in this part we have done a small part in slowing the flow, basically. And I think it's a good way of looking at it. It's not something that it's just a responsibility of a water board. It's not just a government responsibility, but everybody can do something here. And as we have seen, a lot of small efforts, they actually work if you count them, if you add them up. So that was my presentation. I think we then now switch to Stefan.
Excellent, boy. Thank you very much for showing us this. Definitely, we will move on with the second speaker, Stefan. But just before the questions are coming in, that's a very good thing, and we will pick them up at the Q&A. But for now, boy, I have a question for you. You once said in the earlier stage of your presentation regarding the history, we actually robbed the land of its capacity to hold the water. I'm just always wondering, because I see more and more of these presentations, did people know that this was quite a risky consequence, or were they just not aware yet, or was the weather type different, or is it just because of the scale of the whole change that it now has become such a problem for us actually?
Yeah, I think they were aware, because in all these developments, they're all the dimensions are too big for what it should be for like normal. So there is already some extra space, but now with the climate changing, with the extremes becoming more extreme, so we're just running out of space. Yeah. Because as I also said, the landscape is heavily used. Every inch has a function, so you can't increase the dimensions more without having some economic impact for someone. Yeah. So now we're just and as you correctly say, because of the scale, because well, we've done this to the whole landscape, so there is no space anymore. So we have to come up with some different ideas now. Yeah,
fair enough. Let's see if we can hear some different ideas from the second speaker. That will be Stefan Ploum. He's all the way in the northern part of Sweden. He is Dutch, but he did his PhD research all the way over there. And he's very much specialized in groundwater. And he calls it the transportation belt below the surface of the land. Maybe he names it a little bit different. He loves to work out in the rain. Well, that's something special. And he will take us along in his 15-minute presentation. And afterwards, we still have some time left to have the Q&A with all of you. So feel free to hand in those questions while he is presenting. There you go, Stefan.
All right. Well, thank you for that introduction. And I thank Boy as well for the nice presentation. I assume you can all see this slide and the laser pointer. Yeah, so I will be showing you some inspiration from Sweden, how we could potentially adapt in the Netherlands towards the climate challenges we have in terms of drought, in terms of water quality. And I will show you that in Sweden, this topic is also relevant. But as you see in this picture or this sketch, the landscape is of course different and it's differently used, but it's still used heavily. So a little bit of my background, why I'm telling you something about Sweden. As a Dutch person, I've done my PhD thesis in the north of Sweden regarding small riparian wetlands that look sort of like this, that flow into very small streams. And you can see the stream flowing right here. It's very small. So you could say that this is the comparable size of like a small ditch in the Netherlands. And actually these waterways are in the forest often also actually former ditches, but then they have sort of roughened up, so to say. And I've mainly focused on how the water quality in the stream is changed here or influenced by these small riparian wetlands. So for that, first a bit of a broader perspective on the whole stream network. If we have a stream network as this conceptual one, we have of course the bigger order streams and rivers that sum up all the water that's coming from upstream. I think Boy nicely showed the importance of what happens upstream is an effect downstream. But it also means that with the bigger the river, the less interaction there is with the direct landscape around it. So there's, in terms of water quality, also much more processes going on within the water body itself. Then when you go up to the headwaters, the first order streams here in the slide, they could be considered the capillaries of the landscape, or haarvaten that we mentioned in the Netherlands. And they are typically for, at least for forestry and in Sweden, they're typically hard to find on maps, but they are actually everywhere. And they cover a lot of surface area, or they have a very long length compared to the bigger rivers. This is where the interaction happens between the groundwater coming from the landscape and a stream flowing through the landscape itself. So you go from terrestrial to the aquatic ecosystem. And what we've done, both in the Netherlands and in Sweden, is ditch the zero order, so to say, because we want to use the land for either forestry or agriculture. And this is where also the plant groundwater interaction occurs, and the landscape and the groundwater and the stream. So this is an important part that feeds the stream network with water. So a little bit about the similarities and differences between Sweden and the Netherlands. Well, in Sweden, we have, of course, lots of forestry and big clear cuts that affect the landscape. The rivers, the higher order rivers, have formerly been straightened for timber floating, and they are recovering those right now. And in the headwaters, you have lots of ditches that have been dug to drain the soils for improved timber production. And as a consequence, also from the clear cutting, you have lots of heavy metals coming into the streams, and soil compaction that, of course, promotes surface runoff. And then on the Dutch side, we have more agricultural land use and maybe also a lot of urban development. We have straight waterways to get the water quick downstream, which we know is maybe not optimal by now. And we use ditches to improve the field conditions for agriculture. To get on the land with our machines. As you can see in the pictures, we go very closely next to the stream. We also promote high nutrient loads, of course, with the way we're doing agriculture. And then you can see here nicely the algae that maybe benefit from that. So I would say that we removed in both landscapes the buffer or the water buffer that we need most. And I will try to explain this with this plot where I would say the spatial scale of the contributing area is on the x-axis, where here we are on this order of square meters, and here square kilometers. And then here, typical water residence times from seconds to years. And if you look at the terrestrial ecosystem or landscape, what is the water? Well, it's groundwater that is flowing in, say, the orders of years or months. And then on the other side, we have the aquatic ecosystem, which starts at the ditches and first order streams, all the way to the streams and rivers that are bigger, and eventually we will get to the sea. And those are in those catchment areas or watershed areas or contributing areas are in the order of like hectares, several hectares to square kilometers and more. But in between, there is this, I gave it a nice green color because of the illustration I showed earlier, these sort of wetland areas that are in the order of a contributing area of maybe half a hectare to like, say, 2, 3, 4, 5 hectares, maybe a little bit more. And they actually have, water residence times in the order of weeks or months, probably. And if you compare that to the use of the landscape around it, we want to have a water buffer that is maybe allowing that water to sit for weeks or months in the landscape for the typical agricultural crop rotation of, in that order of time. While for forestry, you have a crop rotation or forest rotation of 40 years. So perhaps then you can have a little bit more of a resilience towards these dry periods. And we see it now the last years, of course, with the dry years in the Netherlands that, we are struggling with keeping the water in the landscape. So what is the role of riparian wetlands and forests in this? I think this little comic puts it very nicely, and I think summarizes well what we have done to the landscape. And that water buffering of the wetlands is, of course, on one hand, hydrology, buffering those floods and having the sponge effect, the residence time decrease or increase of residence time. And then as well, the water quality is improved by riparian wetlands and forests by providing shade and cooling and being a nutrient buffer and prevent sediment to erode. And then in terms of biodiversity, I think this is not quite the peak of biodiversity that we're aiming for, and it is sort of a very monotonous landscape. And with giving a riparian buffer, some woody species, for example, that could improve the biodiversity as well. And with, for example, the shading, you provide for example, thermal refugee areas for certain plants and bugs. So what is then the trade-off between the land use and the riparian ecosystem? Because we don't want to overfill our landscape, so to say, with maybe for us directly not very useful riparian buffers if we can't use them, right? So we have to make that a good choice of not doing too much and not doing too little. And I think this shows it nicely how you can optimize this choice by looking at where is the groundwater flowing towards the streams. And that is where you want to retain those buffers. And especially in forestry, those are also areas where you get stuck with your machines. And I'm sure with tractors, you will do so too. So there's a potential win-win there. Yeah, so we're going to focus mostly on those small streams. So where do we protect the riparian zone then? That's a difficult question. We know that there's lots of spatial variability in the groundwater inflows, mainly through topography. And then we can use soil moisture maps to identify where potentially those groundwater inflows are. So that gives a good start to identify the places where we should protect the riparian zone. Well, so a hydrologically adapted buffer zone then would be more cost effective in terms of the positive effect that you give to the stream, but it's also more beneficial for the forester because they could maybe harvest more than, for example, a uniform buffer of X amount of meters, and they get not stuck very often with their machines. So in that sense, it's a win-win. And you protect lots of ecosystem functions. The spatial temporal variability in water chemistry, that is important for the water quality and the biodiversity, you will protect. Where this area, for example, here has loads of labile carbon that flows into the stream, and it has a low EC typically. While if you would have the more normal riparian zone, it has a higher EC and lower DOC. And of course, a riparian wetland as this would sequester a lot of carbon as well, and it functions as a water buffer, like a sponge in the landscape, providing you that water buffer that you want for a couple of months. And then the water that flows sustainably from this little riparian wetland into the stream is a thermal refuge area, and you have a constant flow of cold water also in the hot summers. And as a result of that labile carbon coming into the stream, and you have nutrients coming from upstream as well, you actually promote the uptake of nitrogen, and you reduce the export of it further downstream. And I think, especially for the Netherlands, that's an important process to consider as well. So then back to this sketch that I started off with. Here in the red, you can see nicely this this idea of having maybe a more narrow buffer right here, and then where it's a little bit more wet, you extend the water buffer, the riparian buffer. Yeah, and as I said, with that soil moisture map, you can make that work. And I think in the Netherlands, we have lots of nice maps to work with to maybe achieve a similar result. So how can we use these principles in the Dutch landscape? Well, I would think of two things, and one is polutification of ditches, where here's an example that I found at a water authority website of either reducing the stream bed depth or the stream depth of a ditch, or like completely fill it. But alternatively, could we consider to like let nature do the work and bring back that sponge effect in the landscape by let that ditch fill itself, verlanden. And here you can see sort of the process that I found in a paper that nicely visualizes how this potentially works. And then there's working examples in the Netherlands. For example, here in Dronten, it actually shows that the water quality improves over the order of a few hundred meters. And this here is actually a polutified ditch right behind me. If you would look out of that window, it's right there, with yeah, just the sort of a swampy area, and then sort of a deeper gully afterwards, where there's plenty of water buffering capacity if it rains, and it never floods here to yeah, when it rains heavily or with the snow melt. One difference that you see here, though, is the trees versus, well, one windmill. And if we're talking about shading, well, of course, there's some shade here right in the ditch, but that's not an awful lot of shading to me. So how could we think about that? Well, one upcoming, or maybe not very upcoming, but at least an agenda for the Netherlands in terms of climate adaptation is agroforestry, implementing some woody species into our more conventional 100% agricultural land use. And in that way, you could try and co-locate the trees that you want to introduce with the polutification of ditches, and try to find a smart way of not putting everywhere a big row of trees, but let's see where the groundwater flows towards the streams or the ditches. And maybe you could focus your area there, and you maybe also tackle right away maybe a problematic area in your field that always has been wet or very sensitive for yeah, driving machinery. And you may also prevent situations like this, where with the sun burning on that pollutifying stream, you maybe get results that you don't want, like this duckweed. So I think with that, I want to finish, and I would like to repeat one more time this sort of conceptual idea where I think we need to bring back the water buffers in the Dutch landscape. And I'm going to leave you with a few questions or statements that I think are maybe interesting to discuss. And also, if you have any interest in reading more about Swedish riparian zones and ditches, I could recommend you to look at Lenka Kuglerova or Eliza Maher-Hasselquist's work on Google Scholar, for example. And with that, I think I would like to finish. Thank you.
Excellent, Stefan. Thank you very much. A lot to consider, and we still have 15 minutes left for the Q&A. We also have a poll, so maybe I can also ask Boy to join us again, and to ask my colleague behind the scenes to switch on the poll. Then people can answer it. So the question is, can we reverse ditch cleaning policy? You need a permit to clean small ditches. This is the one, shout out actually that Stefan left us with. Can we reverse ditch cleaning policy? You need a permit to clean small ditches. Many of you, 13, 14 say, we are at 94% saying yes and only 5% saying no. The answers are still coming in. Can we reverse it? All of you are obviously in various aspects, various organizations. Maybe we can share a little bit on that in the chat as well. Depending on your perspective, this might change. But Stefan, how do you like this? We see over 80% now saying yes, it is doable.
That's a positive sound, I would say, because I think that in the Netherlands, or at least I thought the overall opinion is that we need to like mow and keep the ditches clean, to remove the water as quickly as possible from the fields. And I think it's it sounds like a very positive development that is apparently different than I thought.
Yeah, definitely. So the end conclusion is 81% says yes, it's possible, 8% says no, and 11% says other.
Yeah.
All right, Stefan, may I ask you to stop the slide sharing, then we can see you a little bit larger in the screen. There we are, excellent. And there were some questions coming in already. I think some were given already when you were presenting, Boy. Someone asked, can you give us some examples of those 30 small measures taken in England to slow down the flow? Well, we've seen some of those actually, so that's a good thing.
There was also a few others as well.
Yeah. There was also a question like, how is this doable? Emmy is asking, in more flat landscape like North Holland. It's a province just above Amsterdam, actually, with polders and canals.
Well, of course, you're not working in stream valleys there, but basically the same principle would apply. You can also by creating marshlands, for example, or wetter fields in general, which means you have to pump less water, so you're pumping less water out into the main canals towards the sea and the biggest rivers. I think the same principle actually applies. It's just about giving water time and a little bit of space.
Yeah, fair enough. In line with that, like one of the sticky sentences that stick with this is to slow the flow. That's sometimes we've heard that it's all about reducing the peak flow. So we talked about a very flat landscape, but what can be the solution to prevent too much water by rain peaks in Limburg in the south of the Netherlands? Think about the problems by Valkenburg that we had 1.5 years ago.
It's nice for you to bring up the example, because a lot of what I presented, we've been trying to put in practice in that area for earlier flood in 2012 near Sleenaken. So by applying all these small scale measures, having them small scale means they're easier to apply. Permit wise, by convincing people, by convincing landowners, it's easier to work with something small, and by doing all those small things throughout the landscape, you will have your flood protection. Because for me, it's where the rain will fall. You can't predict it, so you cannot pinpoint an area in the stream valley where here is where you need to take your measures. True. If it rains 100 meters downstream, you're still lost. So it's about doing these things, small things, lots of small things throughout. That's the key.
And in line with that, yeah, definitely. So this is your expertise, and obviously there were major floodings as well across the border in Germany and also in Belgium, and actually people lost their lives in those other countries, which was dreadful. Do you now see that because of this severe urge that there is more more space for people to actually also involve larger measurements because the urge is way more higher? That also the governments are investing more in solutions.
You asked whether I was seeing it, right?
Yeah.
No. No, it's more. No, I think the periods of drought are more in the common are driving this development more at the moment. Because for flood prevention and things like that, what I see is that we're trying to revert to to the technical measures of small dams, bigger dams, some huge temporary storage facilities next to the streams. So we're trying to localize it in parts where it won't harm what we're already doing.
Yeah, yeah. All right, let's move over to Stefan. But first, a final compliment for you, Boy. Beautiful pictures, is Henry saying in your presentation. It really helps to understand the presentation. So that's a compliment for you, Boy. And I also saw some very nice images in yours, Stefan. The question by Henry for you, Stefan, is wood production is the problem in Sweden for too much water by peaks. Why cut all the trees in an area? You can cut 30% and leave 70%, so the water system is less changing. Why is this not done?
Yeah, that is a forestry question that I would love to ask my former colleagues at Swedish Landuse or Agricultural University, SLU. But I think typically, well, to say it traditionally, that's the way forestry works in Sweden. The clear cutting is, I think, a big debate whether you should do that or not. They do some like thinning operations, but that's, I think, not specifically for like yielding lots of timber, but more to free up the space in between to let the bigger trees get even bigger. So in that sense, I would not be able to answer for you like why they keep doing the clear cutting, other than, well, that's the way production is still optimized today. So, but I definitely I think it would be much better for the landscaper, for the ecosystem itself if you wouldn't. But I think I have to leave it with that.
Excellent. Yeah. And someone asked you by the end of your presentation, Stefan, what data do you have to substantiate your findings?
Well, so I mostly focused on the small image that I showed of that riparian wetland. I studied the groundwater quality or chemistry in those riparian wetlands, and also outside those wetlands in the normal riparian zone, so to say. And then I used stream water samples as well, combined with it's a sort of a glass fiber cable to measure temperature, to find out where that water is coming in, when it is sort of activated, and what the consequences are for the water quality. And then you can especially see at those riparian wetlands, you get a peak of DOC when water comes through, and also when it's very dry times of the year, they keep giving a sustained flow of DOC or organic carbon to the stream. So they're sort of a hub for water quality.
Yeah, because that's actually one of the main takeaways as well for this webinar, to focus on all these important aspects: the water quality, the transportation of water, and also the safety, and that we have enough of it.
Yeah, like, and I think
the water
important part is where you have to look at the longitudinal processes. So what we typically do when we collect data in the field, we go to one point and we measure there repeatedly, or we go to a well or wherever. But then what happens between those two locations that you're working? We need some information about that as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Boy, you showed us these small hedges sitting on the slope. Charlie is saying added benefit of these hedges is they can also help to absorb or to protect against the strength of the wind. This is very handy when you are cycling. That's a good thing.
Yeah, that's true, especially inside Limburg.
Boy, you're an ecohydrologist, and someone is asking, what are the ecological winds of the clotputter, especially the plants? So what kind of plants do you see coming back? Or adding to the local ecosystem there?
Well, it's still very early days. The project was realized this year, but we already see Botonia palustris is coming back already. So that's one that really indicates groundwater flow. And what we're seeing is that a lot of the area is staying open. So it's not immediately being recruited by plants which do well under more nutrient-rich conditions. So the first signs are very positive, but of course it's early days.
Yeah.
But we did our homework, so it should be fine.
Yeah. All right, we are about to wrap it up, Boy and Stefan. What will be the main takeaways? Like we spoke about a more integral way of dealing with this, not focusing on just a few points. We can also add smaller measurements, and that gives us big wins, as we can learn from the cases in England. What are the final shout outs or maybe call to actions you want to share with the audience? Boys might be slow to flow.
I think that the point that you said of slowing the flow is sort of the main thing that has to resonate from this webinar, I think. And of course, that's not a very unique statement, but I think it's good to emphasize once again that is what that we're aiming for, and maybe let go of the urge to drain everything, because I think now we see the consequences of it in the past years in terms of the droughts, especially.
And now for wrapping it up, thanks so much for your presentation and all the knowledge you shared with us. Boy, you are an ecohydrologist, and Stefan, you are a researcher and now advisor. But I saw on your LinkedIn profile, Boy, that you speak a little bit of Finnish actually as well. What is it about Scandinavia that pulls you guys in? Because you did some stuff with a Finnish university, I saw. It's just a magnificent area, isn't it, to be for people in your expertise? Yeah,
I think, and there is still some space to live there, both physically and both physically and in society. Yeah, excellent. Thanks so much again for the both of you. This whole recording will be available on the website. We hope you had a blast. There's also a survey link to tell us a little bit about how you liked it. The next one will be November 18. It's on circular water in a built environment, perspectives from several European cities. Yet and again on the same times, between 9 and 10 in this Central European time zone. Do you have any ideas? Please share it with us through the website. You can reach out to us. Also, a huge thanks to all of the partners that you can see here in the bottom row. And we hope to see you next time and again on November 18. Thank you so much and have a great day. See you next time. Bye-bye.